We talk about the Smollett hoax, more presidential politics, and we actually do have some election fraud. This is Matt Field, and this is Ditch Your Political Party Podcast. So, a lot to get to this week, per usual, and I really want to get started on just the Jussie Smollett thing to begin with, just because there's been a lot of coverage on it, there's been a lot of miscoverage on it, and this is some of the stuff that needs to begin to stop with the media, with any political party that is trying to pursue some particular agenda. This is the part that just drives me crazy. Again, this is all about ditching your political party. And when you see the bias that has been taking place with these different candidates on the road, with different news organizations in regard to this Jussie Smollett case, it is unheard of. It's disgusting. And we're going to jump into it real quick. So obviously, if you haven't been watching the news, his story was complete garbage. It was completely fabricated. But the media narrative was reinforced. And so they covered it like it was the worst thing that had ever happened, ever. And, it just makes me sick that, this Mr. Smollett here is getting on these programs and he's talking about, hey, it used to be that, I'd say that, this had happened and people would just believe you, and that should be it, that's the truth, that's the way it should be. But now people started questioning it. I mean, this has been going on for the last while. I didn't even, when it initially came out, the week it came out, we didn't even report on it because we didn't find the need to. It was just, when it started out with just an idea of him getting, beat up and all this sort of thing, and but then it turned even more and more political, and he did himself a disservice, he did everyone a disservice when doing it. So the thing that really just broke the camel's back is item after item, his story just began to unfray entirely before his eyes. And because Chicago PD was all over the case and they dedicated a lot of man hours to it, and props to him for doing it. So he's responsible for creating a fake letter that he sent to Fox demanding, trying to cause some sort of threat. When that didn't do anything, so he cut these letters out of the magazine, right? And he sent that over. When that didn't do anything, he set up this fake thing. He orchestrated this whole white power deal, right? Where there's two guys that beat him up in MAGA hats. This is MAGA country. You've heard the story over and over and over again. The attack was completely orchestrated by him, and they found the check that he had signed for $3,500 to his two friends who are of the same race as he is, not white power guys. And they said that they essentially came back to the reason that Jussie was doing this whole thing was because he wanted more money in his position. The ironic thing about it, now there's a few different things. The ironic thing about it is he was trying to get himself more money. He was trying to get a raise because there was so much media attention to him. The media was defending him up and down, even though his story there were so many holes in it, and obviously the Chicago PD recognized that, and that's why they pursued it. And it turns out that Fox they said they're considering their options, but it doesn't seem as though that they're going to be continuing his position in the show. They rushed him, so he was arrested, as you probably saw. He was arrested. He was put, but there was a $100,000 bail on him. So I'm not entirely sure who paid that. I'm pretty sure Fox did, just because they needed to get him back so they could finish their story, or their fifth season of Empire. So they got him back. They did the whole bit. But the part that's so frustrating about this is that even though he's been discredited, his story was a sham, he did all just for money, and he was trying to capitalize on the media's bias towards the whole Donald Trump movement. MAGA hat, the whole thing. And he even admits himself that if it were anything else, then he wouldn't have gotten the attention. So he took advantage of the hatred that already exists in the nation in this regard, and now made it so big that now if anybody else comes out with a story like this, even if they are probably, I mean, I don't want to say pro, but if they would jump on the bandwagon like most of the mainstream media did, then you would wonder if it actually were true because of what Jussie Smollett did here. And the funny thing is that Rahm Emanuel, who is leftist of leftists, he was upset about the whole thing. He's the mayor of Chicago, and he got upset on Don Lemon's show. Don Lemon apparently best buddies with Mr. Smollett, and he called it the fake story. And I don't know if he was just reprimanding Smollett or if he was also reprimanding Don Lemon. So it's pretty crazy, this everything unfolding. The part that's most disgusting about it, is that you have these presidential candidates that are getting ready to go, and as soon as this sort of thing happens, Booker and Kamala Harris, they come out and say this is a modern day lynching, and before they have all the facts. And now that he has been arrested and he's being charged, they're not walking back what they said previously, and now they're saying, and now we need to wait for more information. So they didn't need to wait for more information when he was telling this silly story about him walking around. Just to reiterate again, it is 2 a.m. in the morning in Chicago. It's freezing cold. If you've ever been to Chicago, you're next to that lake, all that wind coming in from it is piercing. It is so hard to be there. It is freezing cold. He goes to get himself a Subway sandwich. He gets a Subway sandwich. He goes into an area where there aren't any cameras for a very, very brief moment, and then he walks out with a rope around his neck with his Subway sandwich. So naturally, if you were to be beat up and you had a rope wrapped around your neck, you would, of course, leave it there. You'd leave it wrapped around your neck, and you wouldn't have any rope burns on there. And you'd hang on to your Subway sandwich, and then you'd walk back to while still having this rope around your neck. You'd walk into your apartment building, pass your doorman, go up to the store while still wearing your rope, and call the cops in 40 minutes, right? And then of course you'd sign a check for $3,500, and you still have the magazine that you would cut the letters out of when you made your fake threat letter. So, the whole thing was garbage from the beginning, but because it advanced a narrative on the leftist agenda, it was pursued and it was propped up. Now, I want to make sure that I'm entirely fair here, because it's not as though that this sort of thing hasn't existed on any side of the spectrum. This has existed on every side of the spectrum for so long. Whenever George W. Bush would go out and do something, the one that probably bugs me the most is the whole idea of, on the other side of the spectrum, is the Patriot Act, right? Somehow, because of the Republicans decided to capitalize on one of the worst things that ever happened in history, which is the Twin Towers falling. And they use that to say, hey, we need to protect you, and we need to make sure that this never happens again. So we want the ability to tap your phones, to do basically whatever we want. This is where the FISA court comes in. And the FISA court is basically a rubber stamp. Anytime anybody goes there to request information, they get it. Except for in really absurd situations. But those are very rare. So this happens all the time with political parties, and people that are, again, I talk about the angel, your political angel sitting on your shoulder, and whenever it whispers in your ear, you do what it says. If that is how you're acting towards your party, then you need to change. You need to stop. Now, we say ditch your political party. I don't necessarily mean, I'm unaffiliated. Okay, I went from, we're here in Utah. That's where we broadcast from. And Utah, obviously, growing up in Utah, you are most of the time you are Republican, right? So I grew up with kind of Republican ideals and things like that. As I grew up, I registered as a Republican when I first started when I was 18. After a while, as I realized I did not like what was happening there, so I registered as an independent. And then independents sometimes are just a bunch of goofballs, and you never know which way they're going to swing. So I decided, hey, I'm just going to be unaffiliated. So I'm unaffiliated out of principle, because I think what has happened with both main parties has been ridiculous. So if you are one of those people that as soon as the Democrats or the Republicans say this, that, or the other, you jump on the bandwagon and support them 100%, then you are a fool. Okay, I do not care what it is. You have to be able to think independently. You have to be able to analyze things logically, and you have to be able to determine what is garbage and what is not, and what is worth supporting and what is not. So, you have Rob Emanuel, who is extremely leftist, getting on Jesse Smollett's case for doing this whole hoax, when everyone else is treating him with the greatest respect. I mean, don't even watch the Don Lemon show, because the moron is so connected to Jesse Smollett. How can you even report it objectively? It's just complete silliness. So, I mean, but this goes back to the whole idea of Michael Brown too, where he had attacked an officer, he had robbed a convenience store, done all these things. He was charging after an officer when they said, commanded him to stop, and he was shot. Then the whole narrative of hands up, don't shoot came about, and it's still used today, hands up, don't shoot, for whatever stupid rally or protest or whatever it could be is made to advance some sort of narrative that never existed to begin with. So here we are with the same sort of thing with Jesse Smollett, and some are still doing the exact same thing they did with Michael Brown. And the difference here obviously is that Michael Brown died because the officer shot him because of what he was doing, and the jury upheld it, and the whole thing happened. But Jesse Smollett, who has been treated with kid gloves, is now out on bail. He's not facing the maximum amount of prison because they're downgrading everything, the charges they're going after him for, which I don't understand why. I'm going to tell you right now, if you are in the judicial system, you should not be considering race at all. The same reason why we don't bring up race here on the program is because if you want to begin to overcome race, you have to stop looking at race. Okay? The most discriminated person in the world is the person that decides to be discriminated against. Okay? Now that sounds like a crazy statement, I know. But at the end of the day, those that get offended, those that get all up in arms about the smallest things, are those that are allowing themselves to be discriminated against. Do you think for a second that Martin Luther was going to let himself be stopped by any amount of discrimination? Then you're a fool. Martin Luther King was the man, okay? He was trying to do his very best to overcome this racial problem that existed in America, and he was doing it with class. He was doing it logically and effectively. Now, he died for his cause, and more power to him for that. And the things that he stood for are great and stand forever. But if you're going to allow yourself to be affected by racism in any regard, then you're silly. Then you are a child. I mean, the only people that really consider the way somebody looks are children, because it's something new. They don't understand it. If you're still thrown off by white guys doing this or black guys doing that or whatever race you're considering, then get over it. Get over yourself. Because the only way you're going to succeed is if you just forget about the whole racial factors and move forward. And I get tired of watching shows, especially shows that I really begin to enjoy, and they bring in some sort of racial aspect, and they try to promote some sort of narrative that exists out there that is minimal at best. So, again, you got to stop with all these political hacks that pose as reporters, that pose as social justice warriors, blah 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 blah. Jussie Smollett is a terrible individual who committed some serious offenses, and now he's going to have to pay for it. And I hope that Chicago PD and whoever is going to, I guess it's going to be their prosecutors, those that are prosecuting should prosecute him at the full extent of the law. It's silly that they shouldn't be going after him for this, especially since the way that he went. This is a full-on federal crime that should be prosecuted to the nth degree, and he should pay for everything, and let the courts decide what his punishment will be. So it is what it is. There isn't a lot that me sitting here can do, but it's something that we can all do, is to change that narrative, to stop allowing race to affect us so deeply. I mean, the leftist agenda is all about intersectional politics. If you're black, if you're a woman, if you're this, if you're that, if you're transgender, if you're gay, then for some reason you need additional help. We have to help these people. We have to. And if you were thinking about it clearly, when do you need help? When do people need help? You need to give, people give help to their children. People give help to the elderly. Why? Because they need it. They literally, physically need it. There's no way they can live without it. But if you're giving help to those who profess a particular intersectional identity, then you are, in essence, suggesting they are helpless. Are they helpless? Are you helpless? If you are someone that is in this intersectional hierarchy, I guess we all are we helpless to some degree or another? Now, I'll tell you, if there was any amount of I've said this before, the openly most discriminated individuals in America are white males. We are openly discriminated against. Okay, we are, it's everywhere. But, you know what the difference is? Well, for one, it's not socially acceptable for you for you to feel offended by it. I watched when they were doing the whole thing with the I'm trying to remember his name right now. It was a little while ago, but the Nathan Phillips, the Native American guy who went out there and turned out again another whole concept of them. This is the media promoting a huge narrative of a garbage story that didn't pan out to be anything even close to what it was, and house of cards just falling in on itself. The same thing with the Jussie Smollett case. The media promotes this narrative again, and those that are on the left are doing the exact same thing, and then it falls in on itself. Okay, it's crazy the amount of times that the media will promote some sort of garbage story just to promote a narrative. It has nothing to do with the actual substance of what had happened. Anyway, but the whole idea that people are going to allow themselves to be offended by this, that, or the other is all up to them. When during that story, the Nathan Phillips story, if you watch the videos, it shows these black guys yelling at these white guys, calling them crackers, you cracker, and they're swearing at them, of course. And so, shouldn't, if they were using the N-word, right, they would be bleeped out. But if they use cracker, that's okay. And to be honest, I've been called a cracker before, I don't care. Who cares? Like, it's such a silly name anyway. And all these other words that are used to offend and to destroy reputations, why should that even matter? If it's a racial basis, who cares? And that's the funny thing, is that, I say that, white males are probably the most openly discriminated individuals in America. And, but we don't care. We just don't care. And granted, we've been on the top forever, racially, based on the intersectional politics. So, but if you're trying to come to the now, and you're trying to put the past behind you, and you're trying to advance, then you're not going to consider the past. It doesn't matter what race you are. You can be as successful and incredible as you want to be. But if you allow your race or your intersectional, qualifications to define you, then you'll be just that. Okay? Let yourself be defined by your merits, which is actually something that Bernie Sanders suggests, and we're going to jump into that in just a second. But first, are you a business owner? Do you have inventory or product, components or ingredients that no one in the company longer needs? If you are dying to liquidate your inventory so you have cash you need to invest more effectively in your business, is it to the point where you're about to shut your doors? If you are battling with surplus or excess inventory, your excess supply list is for you. They put the balance back in your favor. Excess supply list doesn't buy your inventory, but they allow you to post it on their website for free. When you post it, it allows others to see what you have available, and they can purchase that from you, getting you the cash that you need immediately. Go to excesssuppplylist.com, click on publish ad for free, and get it done. You literally have nothing to lose. Go to excesssuppplylist.com, list your excess or surplus supply, and get the cash back that you need. Again, this is excesssuppplylist.com, excesssuppplylist.com. So Bernie is in, and very impressively, I must say. Bernie has a very enthusiastic following. Like, it's incredibly enthusiastic. I mean, maybe even more so than the Barack Obama age. Because Bernie, of course, Bernie's much older than Barack Obama, but the time that Barack Obama was running for president. But here's the thing. Mr. Bernie is like 100% socialist, right? He hates capitalism. He hates, there is one thing I do agree with Bernie on, and it's the crony capitalism thing. He hates crony capitalism, and so do I. When a business is utilizing the government for their own benefit, to lift themselves up, or to push other businesses down, then that's completely terrible. Businesses should not be using the government for their own benefit. It's one thing to try and get your highest deductions and things like that for your taxes, but it's a totally different thing when you're pitting the government against a particular business. This is what Amazon did when they decided to bump up their wages. They bumped up their wages and they said, hey, what about Walmart? You should push Walmart to do the same thing that we just did. Right? Because obviously Amazon's huge, but they're not even close. I mean, if you look at, when you're talking sheer revenue, Walmart still puts the beating on every single company in the world. They were nearly $500 billion this past year. $500 billion. I mean, Amazon can't even dream to have that much. The next person in line, I can't remember who it was, but they were still 4 times their overall. They had maybe $100 billion, and Walmart was still about 4 times their total. So, pretty intense. When you utilize crony capitalism for your own benefit, then that's stupid and that's terrible, and they shouldn't ever do that. It's what happened a lot in the earlier years of the United States, when a lot of the politicians were being totally controlled by some of the real big companies. And I mean, that sort of thing still happens today, let's be real, but it's just a bit more diverse, because there's a lot more diversity in America now when it comes to the way companies function and how they work, particularly the tech industry. So Bernie is in, and he did an impressive $6 million in 48 hours. $6 million in 48 hours. The thing that's crazy about this is 225,000 people donated to his campaign, and the average donation was $27. So a lot of ground roots, moving their way up, helping Bernie to do what he wants to do. Now, Bernie as a candidate, so again, we like to evaluate people. We like to give them, they're all on the same playing field until you evaluate the way that what their history is and what they have done, and what you believe they will do for you in the future, and what their plans are, right? So Bernie, unfortunately, he has a terrible history. He didn't really start working at all until he was in his 40s. And even when he was doing that, he was just doing some writing, and it was very he's got a very shaded past. I mean, Bernie is really old now. He's got to be 70s, almost 80s. And he really hasn't done all that much to contribute to society. And so I'm not a huge fan of him to begin with. And how he was able to be elected to office is probably just because of his rhetoric, which is just a terrible reason to elect someone in any situation. In my opinion, you either have to be wildly successful to begin with, then for you to be elected before you're 30, right? Or honestly, by the time you're 40, maybe at that point there's enough information for people to make the evaluation. Hey, he's been successful, he's been good with his money, he has built businesses, he's, whatever the case may be, his resume, you have to allow enough time for the resume to be developed before you can put them in office. And Bernie didn't even start till he was 40, and then when he was 40, he didn't really do anything up until that point anyway. And then it's the same thing with AOC. AOC hasn't done anything. She hasn't done anything. She was a bartender, and she's super young. I mean, how has she even proven herself? So Bernie hasn't done anything in his life outside talk about becoming communistic or a socialist. And there are very, very few things I agree with him on. When we base it on the merits of his work, it just doesn't make any sense. The ironic thing is he says, as he's talking about, he's trying to dilute this whole intersectional pool, because you've got Kamala Harris, you've got Cory Booker, you've got all these guys who have all this, they have the race going for them, they have the ethnicity going for them, and so he's trying to dilute that whole concept by saying it doesn't matter if you're this, that, or that, we need to base it on our merits. It says we need to have a meritocracy, right? And of course the left hates that whole idea, but he's still appealing. So the two things I agree with him on is that we should all hate crony capitalism, and capitalism's good, but crony capitalism is bad. And we should base things on meritocracy. We should base things on people's merits. Again, the ironic thing is Bernie has done literally nothing, and he's saying base this on your meritocracy. The guy's he talks about crony capitalism, but the guy's worth millions of dollars, has several homes, and what has he done for that? He's just been in public office. That's where he's made his most money. So how does he have all these millions? Well, let's be real. corruption. Like most politicians. Let's be real. Okay? Bernie was a independent. He's a Democrat now. Actually, I guess it all depends on how you run. Maybe he's still sitting as an independent. He'll register again as a Democrat. You can switch parties pretty easily, obviously. But so Bernie is running as a Democrat, of course, but he just has nothing to stand on, in my opinion, along with a lot of the Democratic folks that are running. That's the thing. That's why you can't just listen to that little political angel sitting on your ear. You can't let them tell you how to vote, what to think, and all that jazz. You need to evaluate each of the things they're proposing and really put something forward. The thing that's scary about Bernie is if he were to be elected, he'd be pushing for free tuition for school, for colleges. He'd be pushing for free health care for all. He'd be pushing for... So how is it free? Explain to me how is a tuition free? How is healthcare free? So first off, we have to pay for the facilities at a university, right? We have to pay the teachers. We have to pay for the materials that are being utilized. You have to pay for the electricity. You have to pay for... there's just multiple things that have to take place in order to actually pay for a good education. And the way this happens with schools across the nation is that you either get a scholarship or you pay for it. Okay, when I went to school, I had some scholarship, and then I had to pay for some of it. Okay, that's just the way it was. I didn't have anyone paying for it for me. So there's no way that it can be free. A school can waive tuition based on the ability that they have to provide for particular students, but the government doesn't have that ability because they can't provide for it. But the only way they can provide for it, again, is if they tax the living daylights out of us. It's the same thing with healthcare. Healthcare is even worse. Okay? Now, a lot of people talk about healthcare in the United States, and how it is so expensive. And it is expensive, but let's be real. If you look at it across the world, I need to get the study that I read about on this, but if you look at it across the world, the reason we pay more for healthcare in the United States is because we want more healthcare, and we want it accessible quickly. Now, if you go to all these places like Canada and things like that, it really is it is free, but you could be waiting in line for days, weeks, whatever, just to get the care that you're looking for. If you have a cold, just a cold, and you go to Canada to get this cold taken care of, you will likely be over your cold by the time you're able to get in to get the medicine for your cold. Okay? So, I mean, if Bernie's plan is let the government run everything, basically. And it's funny because he says that all this sort of thing starts from, you can't have things from the bottom, from the top, sorry. It's like you can't go from the up to the bottom. You can't go from the top down. But his entire plan is that he will be working it from the top down. If you want something that is going to be successful, it needs to be broken down into small, manageable pieces. That's why we have federalism. That's why states have the ability to enact their own laws, do different things. The same thing with the city. And so you actually need to give more control to those that are closer to those areas in order for things to be more effectively managed. Now, I'm a big fan of privatization of the majority of these things because the government is the biggest waster of everything ever. I mean, I don't know if I've given the example before, but there was a small, I mean, this is such a simple example, but it demonstrates how stupid the government is and how lazy they are. They'd rather just make a decision and shrug their shoulders and be done with it. There was a community garden in our area, and the mayor said that they were going to clean it up and drop down and make it a parking lot, right? Because there was a new park next to it, and this park was getting a lot of attention, right? So he probably gotten a few calls, and maybe some of the other city council members had gotten a few calls, maybe a few emails saying, hey, there was no space for me to park when I went to the thing. We need more parking, blah, blah, blah. And and my wife is a huge gardener. And so when this happened, she was upset, and I eventually got involved, and I went to city council, and I just remember talking about the entire thing. They had no data to support their reasoning. All they had were phone calls that had come. But we had data. And that's the funny thing, is they totally neglected our data. We went during the busiest time of each day, and we counted the number of cars that were there. The only days where there potentially was not enough space for people were on holidays. But that's the case with anything, right? But standard occupancy, they could have tripled in the number of people attending and still been okay for parking purposes. But they still closed down the community garden and covered it up. And now that's just a big parking lot that nobody uses because there are other parks that are continuing to be put in, and they're just going there. Why would you go to a park? I mean, there's a lot of cachet with the new park, but as soon as that's gone, as soon as there's another park, it's going to be diverted over there. So the reasoning of the government, local, federal, whatever, they're just a bunch of morons. So don't fool yourself into believing that you have really good politicians unless they're willing to actually get down to the nitty-gritty. Now, if it's privatized, if you were to privatize different things, then you tell them, hey, I want the very best deal, and you have multiple people bid in. They bid into this. It's the same thing with roads. It's the same thing with anything. If you're tired of all these roads and all this construction that's taking place, then you need to get a company on board. Have a company do it. People are all concerned, they're going to lose the people that are working for UDOT or whatever, all these different dot companies or dot government agencies that work on our roads. They're going to lose all these jobs. No, they're not going to lose the jobs at all. What are you, crazy? Okay, so if all of a sudden you have a bunch of employees that work, for example, in my city, UDOT, okay, so the Utah Utah Department of Transportation. If you have all these employees working for UDOT and you decide to hire a company that's going to take care of these different things, these people are, one, they're going to transfer out and go to someplace else in UDOT, or they'll get a job with that company. Hello? They still need bodies to make sure they can manage the whole process, right? So if you privatize it, though, the difference is you have multiple companies and they have competition, and so you're going to take the best price. And then from there, if they don't do their job correctly, they lose it and someone else gets it. So they are extremely motivated to keep the citizens happy, to keep the city happy, so that they can continue to have a great account with that city. So this sort of thing can be applied across the board. Can you imagine if we had something privatized like that? You wouldn't be sitting in traffic for days and days and days, well, day after day after day after day, while you're waiting to just pass by a small area that's having a little bit of, a small bit of construction. Because if you had a private company, the city would say you can't interfere with the traffic. You can't do that. See, the government doesn't care. They'll just do whatever they want. We deal with it, right? But if it's a company and we get upset and we complain, they're going to say, whoa, I don't want to lose this account, so I'm going to go in there, I'm going to do it during the least busy times during the day and get it done. So Bernie's plan is, I want the government to run everything and the whole world can be a big DMV, or, the logical idea is to allow companies to pursue these different things and utilize it that way. But nobody's ever proposed that, ever, even though it's an incredible, effective way to function. Anyway, in fact, by the way, everyone talks about Norway and the way that they've got this great healthcare system or whatever, but Norway is actually the one that you pay into a privatized healthcare, and that's how they're able to get their healthcare. It's private. It's totally private. I don't know what the whole issue is with privatizing things, because it's so much more efficient. But again, if you're listening to the stupid political angel sitting on your shoulder telling you what is good and what's bad, then you will moronically move towards those things that are stupid. All right? You have to critically think. And when you critically think, you'll understand that people like Bernie, who have 2 points I agree with, and everything else is garbage, that's not someone you'd vote for or even donate to. But $6 million in 48 hours? Wow, that's pretty impressive. So it's the same thing with the smaller case. If you listen to this story, it sounds like a bunch of garbage, then believe that it is garbage. All right? It's the same idea. If it walks like a duck and sounds like a duck, then it's probably a duck. And that's what Jesse Smollett was, but everyone was saying he was a stallion, right? But, what does that matter? The problem is when you hear it over and over and over again. Jesse Smollett was party to a hate crime over and over and over again. Michael Brown, hands up, don't shoot, over and over and over again. Eventually you just believe it because that's what you've heard so many times. But you can't allow yourself to become part of these pawns. Be a real person. Be someone who can actually do that. All right? So next I want to talk a little bit about your health. So Primal Health and Nutrition is going to be changing their name to Autoimmune Health and Nutrition to more effectively zero in on their target, those that are in need of overcoming flares in inflammation and autoimmune disease. So if you are someone who is living the paleo, keto, AIP, or SCD diet, are you struggling from the autoimmune disease? Has the medication stopped working? Have you tried removing that inflammation from your diet so that your body no longer experiences flares? If you are willing to look at things holistically, you should look at Autoimmune Health and Nutrition. Autoimmune Health and Nutrition started when a sister educated a brother and a brother helped a sister. Their line of 100% compliant paleo, keto, SCD, and AIP diets are #1 on the market. They are the cleanest option available and taste great. Right now it still is, go to primalhn.com and use promo code DYPP at checkout and get 20% off your entire order. If you are tired of the conventional way of healing, go to Autoimmune Health and Nutrition for help, and they will get you on the holistic way to healing. So go to primalhn.com and use promo code DYPP at checkout. Again, primalhn.com. They will soon change that to something in the autoimmune realm, but for now it is primalhn.com. So go there and get some of your products today. There is there are tons and tons of political candidates that are jumping into the race. I have yet to fully review all of them. We will do that on one of our shows in the coming weeks. But my thinking is that Joe Biden will eventually get into the race. I mean, why would you be going around the United States or the world giving speeches here and there if you weren't actually going to do something about it? I believe that by the time he gets into the race, Joe Biden gets in the race, then we will have probably the majority of the presidential candidates that will be in there, and then at that point we will do a full review of these different candidates in excruciating detail. No, not excruciating. It's very informative detail so you can make the most logical decision you can when going to the polls. Again, I am unaffiliated. If there is a better candidate than Mr. Trump that is running for office, then I will vote for him. I was pretty excited about Howard Schultz. I haven't heard much on him yet. I do not know if he has actually even entered the race yet. It sounds like he may or may not. So, but he would be entering as an independent, which would throw a lot of things off if that does happen as far as the Electoral College goes. The win would likely go to Trump, but I don't know. So we'll see what all happens there. But I just want to go on a little bit of AOC ranting just because AOC drives me crazy. Okay, she is an unsuccessful individual who is perceived as a successful individual totally based on her rhetoric. Okay, and her rhetoric is terrible. So her rhetoric, so basically the reason that she's successful is because she's young and she's okay looking. Okay, that's literally the only thing I can conclude. And it's the same thing with the same sort of thing happened with Barack Obama. Okay, Barack Obama did some good things, and he actually could have been an extremely uniting character in his term, during his terms in office. But he, in my opinion, failed miserably because basically while he was there, the recession persisted, and people just struggled, and the whole racial divide increased. If you look at the polls, if you look at the data, it shows that it increased while Barack Obama was there. Now, inspiring? Oh, yes. I mean, he had an 80% approval rating when he was first there. And he could have done some serious good, I believe. But he just fell into the intersectional political politicking and lost it all. And the crazy thing is he should have known from the get-go that the media had his back. I mean, seriously. The media still has his back, to be real. The media still has his back, and he could still do some good. But he could have done some good while he was in office. Excuse me, but he just, for some reason, he didn't. He fell into probably just listening to political advisor after political advisor, hearing it so many times that his political angel was telling him the same thing, and he just decided to go after it. He's more interested in the politicking than he was actually the real change. So someone like him, who had no record whatsoever, he was a professor. Sure, he did have his degree. He was a professor, but he hadn't actually affected the society in any great way. He was a freshman senator, the whole bit, and he became president for 2 terms, and he did a terrible job. Particularly when you look at the amount of debt that he mounted. Now, President Bush before him did the same sort of thing. He put on a ton of debt, but then Barack Obama came in and made it look like it was nothing. And Trump is doing terrible in that realm too. As far as when it comes to budgeting, basically all the politicians since Hoover have been, well, maybe since before Hoover or after Hoover, just idiots. Okay, just idiots. They don't care about the budget. They do not care, and so because of that, it's just gotten worse and worse and worse and worse. And now we are $22 trillion in debt with $210 trillion in unfunded liabilities that we are committed to paying at some point in the future, but we can't pay it. So, I mean, that whatever program that is attached to, it will collapse. We mentioned House of Cards earlier. This is obviously a House of Cards, the United States of America, which is so sad because I'm sure the founders did not believe that people would be so focused on their political endeavors and to be in power that they would completely shred completely shred their money away. Anyways, so AOC, she has engaged in campaign finance law violations. She basically funneled some money to her boyfriend. All right, now it's complicated, it's weird, it's whatever, it's all over the place, and she's upset that people are calling her out on it. But it's true, you know. And the only reason I really call it out on her is because she's a terrible politician. She shouldn't be there, and she should be gone, right? And if this is the way that she's gone, then this is the way that she's gone. I mean, if you look, I mean, the only person that I'm aware of that has ever been put in jail because of violating some campaign finance law is Dinesh D'Souza. And that's because he did, I mean, it's clear. I mean, just connect the dots. I mean, to actually draw a conclusion, if everybody else in the past has just paid a fine for violating campaign finance law, why did someone like Dinesh D'Souza have to be put in jail? And he didn't even donate that much. I mean, it was like a few thousand, or maybe $10,000 or something like that, $15,000. It wasn't that much at all, but he was still thrown in jail, and that's because it was politically motivated, obviously. And whoever was pursuing this decided to make that happen, and everybody else complied to it, which is sad. And it's the same sort of. If this is what the new precedent is, then she should be facing some jail time. But I don't think she should be facing jail time. In fact, what should happen is they should just apologize to those people that, well, Dinesh D'Souza, for doing something like that, and compensate him appropriately for doing something so silly. They should just fine her as they would fine anybody else. But it's just silly. Again, we have a moronic politician in office yet again. Because why? No one knows why. It's the same reason with so many politicians. Why are they there? Because people are convinced by what they say, and they believe that they can actually effect some sort of change when they have done nothing in their previous life. Don't get it. Don't get it at all. You know, I can get on board a little bit with the whole Trump concept. Trump, at the end of the day, what he does and what he says is quite disgusting a lot of the time. But the guy's been effective in his life. He's been quite effective in his business. Granted, not to the extent of someone like Howard Schultz has, who, Howard Schultz actually came from the projects, and Donald Trump came from, the limo. It's a totally different dynamic there, but he's still shown a lot of, and some of the change that he did wasn't good. I mean, the guy loves eminent domain, among other things. But he actually has a bit more of a convincing past than someone like AOC or Bernie or Cory Booker or some of these guys. I mean, and he's not the guy I want to vote for, to be honest with you. I hope that Howard Schultz is someone that I hope the campaign doesn't affect him so deeply that, assuming he gets in, that he throws it all away. I don't know. But right now the choices aren't great. It's like sitting down at a weird fast food restaurant and looking at the menu and realizing that you don't really want to order anything and you'd rather just go without. That's pretty much how the political arena is for me, especially because none of it looks that great, and I don't really want to even, I don't want to participate really, but but I need to eat, right? So I still make my order. So anyway, so we're gonna wrap things up here real fast. We talked a little bit about the election fraud. So Mark Harris running in North Carolina, there has been complete evidence of there being some election fraud that took place, and they have called for a new election. The main reason I bring this up, first of all, is that campaign, these election fraud does exist. For some reason, it's persisted that it does not exist, and the media likes to use this whenever they like to promote whatever narrative they desire. But when it benefits them, again, this is where, just think about it. Just think about it. Get rid of that angel on your shoulder. I guess it's more like a devil. From now on, I'm gonna call it your devil angel, your devil's shoulder angel, whatever. I don't know, but yeah, devil's shoulder angel. Get rid of your devil shoulder angel who politically influences you, because how often has the mainstream media used the whole election fraud concept of being complete garbage, and then they turn around and say that it was, I mean, they talk about election fraud happening all the time when it benefited Hillary Clinton in the last election. But then when Donald Trump won, when Donald Trump won, that's when they come around and, I guess the famous line was when Donald Trump was debating Hillary Clinton, and they say, when this happens, if she were to win, would this, would that transition be very nice? Would it be? He's like, I don't know. I'll see how things go. And it's funny how that they blew that out of proportion. Of course, I mean, Donald Trump was just basically trying to maintain some kind of control when that happened. Of course, he would have turned over power. He's not that tough. I mean, just look at how he's negotiated when it comes to his wall, when it comes to shutting down the government and all that jazz. He's not as tough or as good a negotiator as he believes himself to be. And it's the same sort of thing with this. And so as soon as Hillary Clinton actually lost, then everybody started thinking, hey, maybe there is some actual there is some elections fraud. Maybe the Russians did it. Of course, he blamed the Russians. There wasn't really any information that there was some that the Russians did actually try to do, but it wasn't significant enough for anything to happen. And then they do this whole Russian probe that hasn't produced any results in the last 2.5 years, but for some reason people are still on that bandwagon, still trying to beat it away and trying to do something with it, which I think will be extremely, extremely terrible for them when they actually reach the election in 2020. But whatever, it is what it is, and that's what they're going to do. So to end the show today, I want to just talk quickly about Convention of States. Now, they're not a sponsor of ours, but I'm excited about this because the Convention of States wants to allow states to help create amendments to the Constitution to overshoot what has been happening in Congress. Because usually what happens is it's proposed through the House. The legislative body would propose something like an amendment as it has in the past, and then that amendment would be passed and it'd be signed into law if there's 2/3 support from the states. But this idea, which I think pretty much already exists, is that it comes from the opposite end of the states putting together the amendment and then going to the legislative body. And if you haven't signed the petition yet, then go on and sign the petition, conventionsofstate.com. This is where we can affect some changes, where we can make a difference in what will happen in the future. I don't know exactly how it will all pan out, but I do believe that if there's a couple of things that I would want to do immediately, if I was able to have full reign over the United States, which is not what you should have in the United States, but if there was a way that I could do it just for a moment to sort through all the garbage, the first thing I would do is I would, as they put it in the 2016 campaign, drain the swamp. And the way I would drain the swamp is by passing an amendment that says you can only have 2 terms for a senator and 6 terms for a congressman. And I bet you, I haven't looked it up, but I bet you probably 90% of the people that are in Congress right now would have to leave. And we would have fresh blood in there, and they wouldn't be able to stay there for the rest of their lives, and there would be a ban in this bill, or this amendment that I would have. There would be a ban for them to participate in any lobbying whatsoever. And honestly, there should be a ban on lobbying, if you ask me. Companies hiring people to go in and try and influence. Talk about crony capitalism all over the place, right? So if there was anything I could do, that would be what I would do. That's what I would start with. And then we'd work from there. Because then you'd want to run it. Then you could run it through the legislative body. But that's what, if you were to do something through the states to try and pass an amendment, that would be the amendment you'd want to pass. Is to get get the people out of there, and then start having some change with the new people that come in. That, of course, you'd also have to include in that is finance, the campaign funding. You'd have to get rid of super PACs. You'd have to get rid of a lot of different things, and you'd have to minimize the amount of money that could be donated on individual basis significantly, so you don't have these guys donating millions of dollars to a particular campaign to do what they need to do. Let's have real people in there, right? Let's not have these cronies that have been groomed their entire lives to take over a position that that isn't theirs to give, honestly. But money is very influential, and that's just unfortunate. But if we were to change and make an adjustment, an amendment like that, then it would be extremely effective with those that would come in the future. So, if you love us, and I know you do, then subscribe and tell your friends, and let's help everyone else ditch the political party. Get rid of that devil angel on your shoulder that whispers in your ear and convince you to believe the silliest things in the world, like the Jussie Smollett cases, and how Bernie is great, and all these other silly, and of course how on earth AOC ever got in office, again, is beyond me. But let's look at their track record. Let's look and see if they can actually affect change. Let's look and see if they've been effective. If they've been sitting in the government their entire lives, then I don't think that's really the place you should be. Okay, if you're really going to affect change, you can't be sitting in the government your entire life. You have to be doing something that's affecting change. And most of the time, if you're a government worker, you're just part of the status quo. So, get out there, subscribe, tell your friends, and let's make this thing amazing. All right, thanks, guys.